Hi, Caryma. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's very nice to see you, and it's always nice to chat with you. And today I wanted to talk to you about something that I know you have a lot of experience in, and probably not many lawyers have that experience or they're afraid of being in this type of situation. And so I think that you're the perfect person to tell us and to share with us your experience about how being very involved in the politics and any kind of social events that you see and how you've been covering that in addition to being a lawyer. So for everyone watching this and who doesn't know, Caryma Sa'd is a lawyer who does a lot of real estate law and landlord tenant law, also criminal law. So different areas of law. But in addition to that, you're also very politically active in the sense that you cover political and social events, you attend them, and you will record and post them on your socials with some comments sometimes. And this is something that not too many lawyers do, and some lawyers are afraid of doing because they fear the backlash that it might have on either their careers and their relationships with their clients, future clients, or maybe any judicial appointment, or I don't know, like any kind of other reason. So, in any event, I wanted to chat with you about that and see why you do that, first of all, and how you're dealing with this, and how do you overcome the negativity or the backlash that you may experience. So, up to you, Caryma.
Thank you for that intro. I'll just preface by saying that I leave the real estate to the solicitors, but my practice is landlord tenant, criminal, and a little bit of civil. And kind of the journalism that came after. Um, I started attending protests late 2020, early 2021, during the height of lockdowns. And I was just curious. I was motivated by curiosity about what was compelling people to participate in weekly demonstrations at a time where we were all being instructed by the government to shelter in place. I was curious about the relationship between police and protesters, politicians and protesters, how some of the arguments being raised relate to civil liberties and the criminal law component, and how there was enforcement or lack of enforcement. And so the journalism really came out of an interest in law and seeing how that was being applied in the streets, and how it connects to media and political institutions and police, and really just like I say, a curiosity trying to understand people's perspectives. Um, and I myself, like, I'm a political person, but in the course of doing this kind of work, I have tried to be really careful and guarded about my own opinions. When I first started out, I think I was a bit more heavy handed and maybe even judgmental at times. And I think that that was misplaced. And I think it did a disservice to the work I was trying to accomplish. And so I have become a lot more strict, shall we say, about really focusing on what's the Canadian response to domestic or international issues, and what are Canadians doing on the streets. And, to the extent that I'm giving opinions, it may be about specific tactics, or, is this a lawful or unlawful form of expression. But even there, there's so much that's open to interpretation. And my main MO is to record footage, uh, publish it, mostly raw, with minimal editorializing, and let people come to their own conclusions. Now, despite that being my intention, and what I set out to do, people will often project political opinions onto me and make assumptions based on what I say or don't say about what I might must actually think or what I must
Or
actually
also
believe.
based on your background, sometimes people will
Oh,
assume,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, based on my background, sometimes based on my associations,
Hmm.
even associations where it's a professional relationship, where I
Right.
have a particular client. And so it's assumed that, I must stand for everything that that client represents. Um, and like all of this, I think, comes out of a need that I don't know if this is a new thing or an old thing or what, but there's this need to categorize everyone, and to say, just put people into boxes, pigeonhole them, um, and like that uncertainty. I think makes people uncomfortable, and they got to fill those gaps. And so, even though my work is inherently political because I'm covering political issues, um, despite having minimal commentary that would kind of reveal where I lean and which direction. That is projected on me, and people make these assumptions, and you get painted in a certain way. There's an irony to it in that people from different backgrounds will paint me in opposite ways.
Hmm.
So to some, I'm this, to others, I must be that. And like they don't see anything kind of just beyond themselves, or beyond their own perspective. And so getting to kind of what your introduction, right? Like there is a reluctance perhaps for lawyers to engage in this way at all because it does come with some serious downsides. And the current political climate is one that is quite unforgiving, right? And unforgiving not just on your own actions or conduct or speech, but there's the expression. How does that expression go? I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but the idea is that a lie can get halfway across the world before the truth even has a chance to put on its shoes.
Yeah.
And there is real truth to that. And that can be extremely damaging. And we aren't really trained in PR through law school. Instead, what we're taught very early on is that reputation is everything. And if anything sullies your reputation, you are in deep, deep trouble. And I think that, that is a fact. But what is left out is that you don't actually have to do anything to have people attack or try to ruin your reputation.
Right.
There can be falsehoods attributed to you, things taken out of context or misrepresented or twisted or exaggerated, and that's enough in this climate, for bad actors to run with. And
And
so,
yeah.
kind of, is it worth it? Is it worth it? I ask myself that, excuse me, fairly often. Um, and for myself, I think I'm too far gone and too invested at this point in the work that I'm doing to give it up. But our expression matters, right? Like expression matters. I think the charter matters. And I think that exercising rights, particularly where there are consequences for doing so, it's a fight worth having.
Well, and also, I think that what many of us are feeling right now is that there's this need for information. It's sometimes difficult to find information and to find unbiased information or information that just shows you what's happening without any kind of commentary or biased opinion. And people are looking for that and they can't find it. And so that's why we do need people to show us a view, show us what's happening, or show us just record the events and say, hey, this is what's happening. You make your own interpretation, but I'm just showing you, I'm giving you the information, I'm giving you the picture. I find it so hard, even though there's a lot of technology and there's a lot of like we have social media, but people have this uh, desire to know and to get information. And that's why it's pushing more and more people like you and others to try and open up this discussion and give this information to people. But then the question is, how do you deal with this backlash or the criticism? Because it must be difficult, I think, like when people criticize you, especially when you're being misunderstood. I think like the hardest part is when you do something for a specific reason and it's being misunderstood and misinterpreted. So how do you deal with that, Caryma?
It's a very good question. And I agree that there is a desire to just see and know and understand, and that people who try to provide that service are actively pushed out by individuals who have an agenda or want to
Mhm.
control the narrative, and so are hostile to any lens that is independent or they perceive as adversarial. And it it is a very intense space to be in like because I focus particularly on protests and political activists, and so um, you you're exposed to a lot of extremes in that,
Right.
and the extremes on either end have similar aversion, I would say, to the presence of outsiders and the tactics that can be deployed to try and dissuade independent cameras range from physical assault and intimidation
Mhm.
to online smear campaigns and defamation to spamming with one-star reviews, or mass reporting accounts, contacting clients to try and dissuade them from working with you, um, you know, all manner of silencing techniques. So how do you withstand that? Um, in some cases, I have had to file police reports. I found that unfortunately, law enforcement is quite reticent to put in the work that's required to address this type of coordinated behavior, which, in my view, amounts to intimidation of a justice system participant, in some cases because of its specific motives and the approach that's taken. And police have been, as I say, not all that helpful. Um, I have some civil litigation on the go. So that's like another avenue to try and address bad behavior. But at the end of the day, my motivation to do this is internal. And so there are these external happenings, and you know that is just a fact of being in this space. It shouldn't be, but it is what it is. And so in dealing with it, um, you know number one, I would say, is I try to stay grounded and attuned to my own moral compass. So knowing why I'm doing something, having certain internal policies and parameters and kind of guidelines that I can refer to, particularly when decision making, that I find is helpful, because it means that there is thought going into decisions. They are justifiable, and they align with my own ethical framework and are, of course, legally compliant. So doing that sort of behind the scenes work that isn't necessarily shared or broadcast, but allows me to have a sense of confidence in the steps that I take. So that's first and foremost. You know, you have to know why you're doing what you're doing, and have a framework for it. And that is proven invaluable, because part of the, there's an attempt to instill self-doubt, um, right, or to undermine one's confidence, and that can be uh, very difficult to contend with, especially as someone who I'm naturally pretty self-reflective. And so when you have all of this external noise coming
Mm-hmm.
at you, trying to make you question what it is you're doing, or the propriety of it, or the value of it, that can be a challenge. And so I found that kind of retreating into my own policies, and having sort of an established um, set of mentors, or like people for feedback who I trust and whose opinions I'm actually soliciting, not unsolicited voices, but someone to run things by. And I'm very grateful to have colleagues in both the legal and journalism fields, who I can go to when I encounter kind of problems or issues that maybe I hadn't considered.
And I wanted to ask you, Caryma, how does this affect your relationship with your clients? Like, does it have any impact? Does it matter to your clients that you're also very politically active and that you cover protests? Or do they just simply don't care? Like, they just care about what you're doing in the case? Like, what is the client's reaction?
I think most clients care primarily about the results in their own matters.
Mhm.
So, that's always priority number one for me. And I think it's reflected in the work that I do. Um, there are some people who actively seek me out because of
Mhm.
the profile I've been able to build, and they kind of want that type of tenacity and advocacy in their case. So it has been helpful in that regard. I'm sure it also puts some people off, and they end up not becoming clients as a result. And that's fair. It is a good fit where it works. I certainly am not hiding any of the my extracurriculars. So I leave it to my clients or prospective clients to decide whether that's something that works for them. But I haven't had the experience of, it hasn't been a negative apart from perhaps people who self-select out. And that's okay, because there are people who select in.
All right. And what about the rest of the profession? Like, for example, judges or crowns? Like, have you felt that that has had an impact on their interactions with you or in the way they work with you on a case?
I haven't had that experience with the judiciary or any of the adjudicators I deal with. Um, if such a bias does exist, it's very well concealed. And I trust the system enough to believe that in any particular matter, it's going to be the facts and the argument and the application of precedent that is governing any decision making, as opposed to liking or disliking the particular advocate. So that may be a little bit naive, but I do believe in that aspect of the system. And where that isn't the case, and error would be reviewable. So uh, that's the one side of the equation. In dealing with crowns, um, the crown has a very particular function. If we go by the black letter law and sort of the spirit of what they are doing, I think that there are times where um, like decision making can be politicized in Crown's offices. I don't think that that's unique to me, though. And ultimately, everything goes before a judge if we can't resolve. So that's that.
And how did you like have you had situations that really affected you where you just questioned whether you wanted to continue doing this or not?
Absolutely. It can be kind of a thankless task at times, and I'm not doing it in order to again, the motivation for this work is internal, but the consequences or negative effects can weigh you down. So, to any lawyer who is considering, to what extent do I want to be politically active or vocal or even enmeshed to any degree in controversial issues, it's something to really consider before you jump into that deep end, because once you're in, right? And there may be ways to wean oneself off of that. But the internet is forever. And depending on what it is you say or do, there can be individuals who are very persistent in trying to make that part of who you are, and attach it to you no matter what, right? So be careful and thoughtful about what it is that you say. But again, I think there's value in exercising our own civil liberties as lawyers. I think that, um, to the extent that that's discouraged or there are consequences attached, it may be a fight worth fighting. And that's how I feel. I'm also positioned in a certain way, being a sole practitioner. That
Mhm.
gives me more freedom than if I was at a firm with other partners or associates who would be impacted by my actions. So that's something to think about. And even in terms of family life, that's a consideration as well. So, I recognize that I have certain degrees of latitude because of just where I am, and how I'm situated, and so that may factor in differently for someone else. So it really is context dependent, and it's very context dependent.
And you've been doing this type of work now for a while. It's been for 5 years because it really started during COVID, but it evolved and now it's all kinds of protests. It's not just the COVID measures. It was very much that in the 2020 and 2021, but now we have all kinds of other protests. So, but you're still doing this. So you must have now found some tools and mechanisms to deal with all the noise and all the negativity. So if we can talk just a little bit about that before we end this interview, because I think that this is something that if there are people who are watching this and who are interested and they too feel like there is something, an issue, and maybe they don't want to cover as many topics as you do, Caryma, but there is one particular issue that they're really very passionate about and they do want to deal with it and they're prepared to deal with some backlash. But what are the tools that you have developed to deal with that so that even if it does happen, it won't affect you as much as before?
Sure. On a very practical level, um, there are tools in social media that will allow you to filter the types of notifications that you get.
Mhm.
And I don't need to see a lot of stuff. I don't, and I, so I'm going to obviously speak specific to myself. Different people will use social media in different ways, but I find that there's limited value in the back and forth kind of replying to comments, or I think that there's limited value in that for me. Others may feel differently, but I don't even know, am I engaging with a real person? Am I engaging with AI?
True,
Um,
true.
and so I find that that can be an energy draining thing. So like the tools, I suppose, that I'm alluding to here are your settings, like making sure that you're not being inundated with the negativity. And I don't know that this is a tool, but what's lacking in a great degree is nuance, and actually like opinions being grounded in fact or law. So there is real value to having those voices out there. Um, and the pushback, like it, no matter what you say, there will be people who have extreme reactions to
True.
it. So bracing yourself for that in advance, knowing full well that you can be objectively 100% correct and factual in saying something, and it will still kind of elicit
Yeah.
naysayers or people who are just oppositionally defiant or what have you. So just knowing that in advance, I find kind of makes it easier to deal with because okay, like this is par for the course. And like it is. This is maybe more of a strategy than a tool, but being able to disconnect is important. Kind of, there is a distinction between online and real world, that can be blurred, and that's not to say what happens online doesn't matter, because it can have real world effects, but being able to unplug, kind of it gives a measure of like you can recharge.
Yeah.
So knowing that, like, and exercising that is important. And then, the I've referred to this already, but tools in terms of having a bit of forethought in what potential issues could arise, and then maybe making a decision tree on how do I deal with certain things, or what factors do I consider when making sort of decisions. It's a bit nerdy, but I find that that's personally useful. And then certainly the best resource or tool is thoughtful colleagues. So I can't understate the value of that.
All right. Well, I wanted to thank you, Caryma, for taking the time to chat with me today about this very interesting topic. I mean, I follow you on social media and I do see your work and I see how very active you are. And I think it is important to have someone in the legal profession because we have less and less people in the profession who are um, talking about issues that are happening. Sometimes some of these issues do affect us as lawyers. So it is important to have some of us at least willing to have these discussions. And even though they're sometimes difficult discussions, but it is important to have those views out there and these facts also show to the profession. So I would just say that for anyone who doesn't already follow Caryma, follow her. She's very interesting to follow on social media. Whether you agree with her or not, just just see what kind of work she does. And I want to thank you again for sharing with us your experience and how you deal with these types of situations that are not easy. So thank you very much, Caryma.
Thank you so much.